Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1151. The Pig, Lyca, and Basilith. He roared in rage as his enemy was once again shattered but quickly reformed itself. The great demon had quickly realized that he was actually fighting a golem, but it didn't help soothe his anger. Again and again, he crushed the moving armor. Again and again, it started rebuilding itself. Porco had unleashed his full power to deal with the weird warrior quickly and to take revenge on Minas Mar for the loss he suffered. Instead, he felt like he was being whittled away, despite his efforts. His opponent simply kept coming back, while the cuts on his arms still burned with excruciating pain and refused to heal. He was a mountain, hard and strong. He was able to crush anything in his path, but the golem was like the ocean. Unrelenting, unforgiving, constantly eroding his base using the flame of the burning skies. His heart quivered at the time it would take to recover to his former strength. Decades? Centuries? That was if he ever even managed to climb his way back up. He couldn't even flee at this point. WebNovel didn't accept cowards and much less weaklings. Porco would die here or by his hands. The frustration, the sorrows, everything fueled his rage and madness, as he poured it into his attacks. Laced with curses and dark magic, his fists kept pounding the little bastard into the ground. There was no way out, other than winning and surviving here. He would survive? A sudden strike filled with tremendous power hit his back, catapulting him deep into the cliffs. He raised himself. The attack was unlike anything the little golem had done so far, and it lacked the searing pain of demonic flames. However, the physical force behind it actually cracked his spine. The damage was healed by the time he was able to stop his flight, but it had left a lasting impact. The thing he was proudest of was his physical strength and defense. His body was a fortress. Despite that, his back was shattered. The thought of a purely physical force able to do so ran shivers down his healed spine. Not even WebNovel was able of an attack of this extent, and he had long become a demon king, a legend by system standards. Crush rock in his hands, he pulled himself out from the hole he created on the way and finally saw his attacker. A tall, lean woman wearing golden armor in the style of the Olympian pantheon. In her hands a shield, dripping with his blood, and a spear. "I'm Lyca, Amazon of Solene. I'm on my journey into the system worlds. Would you care for a bout?" she asked with a confident smile, as if she was simply introducing herself to a simple stranger. He knew her, but he almost failed to recognize her. The power she radiated was on a completely different level from what he witnessed during the tournament. The little golem was annoying, but this wench seemed like a serious problem. "How are things going?" Seth asked the moment he entered the VIP lounge that had become their base of operations for the moment. When he looked around the room, he found that most of his friends had their eyes glued to their screens. "The fights across the city have calmed down and the members we sent out are now gathering at the center to deal with the remaining swarm and the deserters." Love gave a short summary of the current situation. Without the Immortal to back them, the alliance had lost its cohesion. Fearing a monumental loss, they were all trying their best to get out of the city, now that the barrier was gone. The people and allies of Minas Mar on the other hand had fought with minimal losses so far and were now pushing inward to surround the remaining enemy forces. They had come to murder and pillage, and nobody was ready to just let them leave without paying the price. "What about Mina? Did Lyca get there in time?" the blacksmith asked the more pressing question. He didn't feel the need to hide that he cared for her the most, especially since she was the one in the danger zone. Love couldn't suppress a small cheeky smile. "What do you think they are watching?" she asked, pointing at the crowd in the lounge watching a broadcast with rapt attention. "Since Lyca brought a few live broadcast golem eyes with her, we were able to get a live feed from the battle. Mina is fine. The golem bought enough time. Now it and Lyca are fighting the beast." She explained the situation and showed him the broadcast on the tablet. It was a massive hog walking on two legs, being pummeled by Super Saiyan Lyca and the half-molten Basilith. The northwestern part of the Pythian village was completely fucked. The plain where the city was built had turned into a landscape resembling a miniature version of the guild's holy land. In the air above the jagged battlefield floated people wearing crowns of dark energy, seemingly unconscious. Mina was not involved in the fight, but Seth could see the shadows move at the fringes of the scenes, taking away these victims. Like the others, his attention was drawn to the battle, once his worries for his fiancée were appeased. It didn't take much for the demonic bard to recognize the opponent as a demon, and a strong one at that. Secretly, the blacksmith had thought of Basilith as one of the golems with the greatest growth potential. Its power right after creation probably only fell behind Alzalsar and the Colossus of Rhodes. That it could keep up with a great demon without having much chance to grow, just showed that he was correct. Seeing Laika able to pummel the great demon just confirmed his opinion of her. She may not be a legend, but she was probably around the power level of Alzalsar, albeit with a different specialization. Did you decide not to broadcast this? Seth asked Love. The scenes currently shown in the arena and to the world, were the triumphal advance of Minas Mar's forces against the chaotic army of cultivators. We discussed it, but decided to keep this footage back, Mary intervened. Good. Well done, Seth praised with a nod. After all, they were not a TV station that had to chase quotes at any price. Basilith was the secret bodyguard he prepared for Mina, and Finn revealing his existence to the world would just made its job harder. Wait, what is going on there? Dohu suddenly mentioned, looking at his screen. Mina was high above in the air, collecting the last floaters, when she noticed a dim orange glow in the devastated city below. It wasn't the fire of Basilith, who turned into a beast of semi-liquid metal. It also wasn't like his golden radiance, but a much dimmer and much wider glow. The light crept up through the holes, the cracks, and the canyons created by Porcobello's rampage. Ah, shit, Mina mumbled, pulling away the remaining floater and getting away from the battle. She had stayed long enough in Delta to know that a glow from the deep was nothing good. After all, the biggest threat to the Central District was that the highest peak of the Central Mountains range, not too far away from it, was a massive volcano. As such, her first thought when seeing this kind of glow was that magma was trapped below the surface of the mountains. Porco had ripped and trenched into the bedrock, hundreds of meters deep. The conclusion was only logical. Looking back from a safer distance, Mina's heart dropped. Porco had stopped fighting the two and ignored their attacks. Instead, he was once again lifting his fists in the air. He was surrounded by an aura of darkness, that stopped Basilith and Laika from interrupting his final move. The power was channeled into his raised fist, just before they struck down at a speed, Mina couldn't perceive. It was as if a massive hammer strike had pounded the ground as Porco hit it for the third time. The whole area in a radius of hundreds of meters sank down by tens of meters. The next moment, fountains of molten rock rose into the night sky, illuminating the ragged landscape with their orange hue. A truly apocalyptic scene. Where the pig, Laika, and Basilith had been fighting just moments ago, a lake of lava was quickly taking shape as the liquid rock filled the crater. Chapter 1152 Pawns. If there was no way out for him, he would at least make his enemy's victory as bitter as he could. This was the decision Porcobello made, moments before he concentrated all his power and fired a suicide attack into the ground. He decided to destroy as much of what they tried to protect, as possible. The flame of burning skies had eaten away too much of his strength to take down the whole city, but he felt a sense of satisfaction when he saw the yellow magma bubbling up and rising around him. It warmed his heart, so to say. Laika, the Amazon, had to back off, evading the rising tide. Even someone with her strength couldn't just walk around in molten stone like it was nothing. Porcobello himself could feel it singing his hair and cooking his skin. A demonic scent of bacon filled the air. His power was exhausted, and he was close to death. He could only welcome the blade of the only one thriving in this changed environment. The little golem had no disadvantage, fighting in a field of magma. The great demon didn't even resist, when the unfinished blade it wielded sliced his flesh and pierced his heart, burning it with the flame of burning skies. His last moments were filled with the searing pain of the flame pouring into his body. Still, there was an ugly smile on his face. I may fall here, but don't think this is over, he whispered maliciously, before sinking to his knees, his corpse submerging in the lava. He left a last, disconcerting message with Basilith and died. Krana, capital Krana, Imperial Palace, a few days later. Warm sunlight fell in through the large windows, in the back of the wide desk. The office tinged in the golden light of the evening sun was Spartan in furniture and decorations, but what was inside was of the highest quality and craftsmanship. Sitting on the desk, with the sun shining on his back, was a young man with shoulder-length blonde hair, glittering in the light. With an amused frown, a smile somewhere between dissatisfaction and malice, the man read a stack of paper that came together with a display orb. Plans couldn't always work out perfectly. Like last time when he sent pursuers after the champions of Minas Mar that had entered the system world to gain acclaim. Miraculously, they all managed to escape the people sent after them and the schemes set up to fell them. The people of Earth seemed like poison to elaborate plans. The only one suffering a major injury was the man who gained the name of the Beauty Sword. Reportedly, the agents managed to sever his leg with the system blade, meaning that there was no way for him to recover it. But this was the only achievement that came out of that plan. But this time, Pons Leon Krina, third-born of Leander Cornelius Krina, the Emperor of Krina, couldn't help but smile in sadistic anticipation. Of course, not everything went as expected. Did he expect for Minas Mar to be actually able to deal with the legend and his forces they had ushered in from the adjacent world? No. That even Bragmummel's subordinates would be unable to stir much trouble was also against his expectations. What he wanted was for Little Gamma to be razed to the ground and the whole Pathworks to watch as it happened. Why else would he have pulled some string to allow the broadcast to reach as far as possible? Instead, only the temporary settlement surrounding the arena had suffered damages, part of it vanishing in a pool of magma. The guardian god of Gamma made a cinematic entrance onto the world stage, reportedly defeating a fresh legend right after its ascension. The alliance of cultivators that invaded was repelled or captured, and a great demon was slain. Great news for them. Still, the reason he couldn't help but smile, was because he already imagined the future. Right now, they were so happy, flaunting their victory and garnering praise. In the meantime, none of their actions had thwarted the original objective. The fact that Earth no longer rejected the entry of legends was now public knowledge for all to see. It wasn't just that a foreign legend had entered their world, but everyone saw the appearance of a new god live on TV. Nobody could deny it anymore. Among the stack of paper in his hands, was also the official statement of Spacia concerning this topic. Spacia stated their claim to Earth under the name of the Durnham family and their intent to defend this claim with the use of legends. Everything was as they agreed on. Pons couldn't help but laugh inwardly, about how fruitful this cooperation had been so far. He had taken quite the loss during the evaluation, as the people under him lost most of their promising talents to Nadine Durnham. However, yesterday's enemy was today's friend. Following the incident during the evaluation, Spacia had actively intervened on Earth and approached him for an alliance he had yet to regret. He was able to push out Hardwig, the favorite son of Leander, Frame, and estrange Lena from the capital and get closer to the seat of the Emperor, all for the small price of a single, small world. Now, all the requirements were met, and all pawns were in place. He could finally hold up his end of the deal. "Are you really leaving already? Why don't you stay for a little longer? I want to show Delta to you." Mina whined, trying to convince Laika to stay. A few days after the tournament and the Pythian Games ended, Laika shared her intent to leave Earth and keep traveling. Seth would have also asked her to stay, but he doubted he would be more convincing than Mina. Of all the people that were leaving, he wanted her to stay the most. After all, she was someone of comparable power level to Alzalsar. However, the Amazon was in the middle of a ritualistic journey to explore the world. He could only try to understand her circumstances since he didn't have the means to make her stay. Most of their temporary allies recruited during the tournament intended to leave soon. Even Poulter. He was sad, but he could understand that he wanted to go home, after such an exciting adventure. After all, Poulter's homeworld was also a new one and not exactly peaceful either. The urgent situations had been dealt with. Although the northwestern part of the Pythian village had turned into an expansive pool of lava and many buildings across the city were damaged or destroyed, there was a minimum number of casualties. Not many remnants of the sect alliance managed to flee in the battle following Python's intervention, rendering the imminent threat of cultivators negligible. As for Python, the guardian god of Little Gamma was currently curled up under the guardian tree, digesting her gains from the battle. After Python vanished with Yumama, there was no notice of either of them until the early hours of the next day, when Seth got two distinct messages, pertaining to her deeds. Ding! Your creation Python has defeated the legend Yumama, the frozen saber and inherited part of his legend. Ding! Your creation Python gained the title World Snake and inherited part of the corresponding myth. As for what exactly this meant, he had no idea, since Python stayed curled up and didn't react. As mentioned, she was busy digesting the influx of power she gained, not just from Yumama, but also from the announcement that she was a freshly ascended lesser god who was able to slay a legend. As for the public opinion after the battle, it was unexpectedly good. Maybe it would have been different if people knew that they had willingly taken some risks, but as for now, Minas Mar was known as a growing force from a new system world, that was able to grow in record time to the point they were able to defend against a legend and a huge army of high-level enemies. The publicity was visible in the power of existence the members who managed to play their part on the big screen reaped. Not so much for Seth, since the whole battle slightly overshadowed the whole story about the legendary price. Still, it grew, too. Seth himself had been busy helping in dealing with the aftermath for the past few days. Now, that things calmed down and visitors were quickly flowing back to their own homes, he finally had the time to take care of the next step in their plan. "Hello Daolun, I'm glad we are finally able to meet. Come, take a seat. Let's talk about your prize." Chapter 1153 The Prize. During the tournament, Seth had taken on 2 contractual obligations to make items. He promised Nam to create an item to help him, in exchange for his service and the blueprint for said item, and the other was the grand prize of the tournament. Of course, the former had to wait until the winner received their prize. "You want what?" the blacksmith asked again to make sure he didn't mishear. "I hope you could create a heaven-grade set of robes for me," the poison fairy repeated herself. "And not an armor or weapon or jewelry, but robes." Seth stuttered. He was known as a master blacksmith. The whole point of the tournament was to make his skills known to the world. Why in the world was she asking for clothes? Wasn't the prize any kind of heaven-grade armament? Daolun asked innocently. She blushed a little before she continued talking. It seemed she was aware that her wish was slightly outside the scope of what was supposed to be the prize. It's just. I have been looking for a really long time to get a set of clothes that won't deteriorate and break down from my skills, especially when I think of the future. I know it's a little much to ask, but heaven-grade robes are what I really need the most. I'm actually on the cusp of breaking through, and I'm afraid." Her hands moved nervously with slight embarrassment. "I'm afraid to be disrobed every time I use my skills. Once I break through to the spirit-severing realm," she finally revealed her concerns to the blacksmith. Seth looked at her. He remembered the spam in the chat during her fight with April. Yep, her sudden disrobing in the middle of a fight was dangerous for all parties involved. Especially her dignity. Seeing the cold poison queen this fragile touched Seth a little, however, it couldn't be done. "I understand your circumstances, however, I can't make you a legendary heaven-grade robe as the prize for the tournament," the blacksmith said with a sigh. For that grade, he needed Nico Boo's, and it wasn't the point of the tournament to advertise their ability to make legendary textiles. I see, if you can't do it, there is nothing I can do about that." Then maybe a new dagger, she accepted his refusal, turning even redder now that she had exposed her weakness for nothing. "I didn't say that we can't do it. I'm just saying we can't do it as the prize for the tournament. It wouldn't be good to publish that we can do that, too. At least at the moment. A dagger, or maybe a set of daggers, seems like a good prize to advertise," the bard clarified the misunderstanding. Daolun looked at him with big eyes. "But you can make me a set of heaven-grade robes? I already made a lot of sketches about what I need," and she jumped up excited before she quickly railed in her emotions and sat back down. "You probably aren't offering this to me for free, right? We are talking about a heaven-grade armament. There are sects that will sell out cities to get their hands on one. I have no money or backing to my name. What exactly do you want from me?" she suddenly asked with concern. Although she seemed to imagine all kinds of terrible things, the shocking thing was that she seemed to be ready to do anything. Seth had the substantial suspicion that the fear of going commando in the middle of the battle was not her biggest reason to look for custom-made legendary robes. Although she had concerns, she really seemed ready to do anything. A beautiful, fair lady, ready to do anything he asked of her. Plop. He slammed a contract paper on the desk between them. "Sign this, and I will fashion you in heaven grade from to toe," the demonic bard offered her soul contract with a bright smile. It was the same conditions he offered Nam. A lesser man may have thought of something more uncouth than forcing her into a 10-year free labor contract as combat personnel, but not Seth. He wasn't unaware of this option, but he was simply a loyal man, to 2 women. There was no space for kinky stuff unless Mina or Finn brought it up. Daolun's value as a combatant far outweighed her worth as a human of the opposite sex. If he could make a Daolun that broke through and got her hands on a legendary robe to stay with Minasmar and protect their people for the next 10 years, it was almost as good as Nam. If he was lucky, she might also share the method to make the silver sparrows with him, if she needed more of them. As for the robe in question, he would need to bring her to Nico Boo's, their master tailor, for a separate conversation later on. Seth's sewing skill had improved to the point he could appraise legendary cloth items, but he was no master tailor. Introducing him to the poison fairy wouldn't be a problem once she signed. All the important clauses were already in the contract, so they wouldn't have to keep many secrets from Daolun. While Seth had his own thoughts, Dowlun was carefully reading the contract. Opposite to her earlier excitement, her eyes were slowly wandering across the paper in slow deliberation. This was the great advantage of a soul contract, one didn't need any special skills to read and understand it. Even an illiterate would be able to read the demonic runes burned on the paper. Okay, this seems satisfactory, she said after a while. She had probably read the whole document twice. Surprisingly, she had no further questions or complaints. The demonic bard almost regretted not putting in any catch. Even just to see how she would react if she found one. If you agree, you just have to sign with your blood, he explained the procedure. Before Seth could offer any utensils, the cultivator had already stabbed her fingertip with a needle and drew several characters in thick lines with her bloodied finger. Once it was signed, the bard maid stored it with some fire and smoke. Can we talk about the robe now? She asked with glittering eyes, ready to pull out a bunch of sketches from her cosmos pouch. The blacksmith shook his head. I will have to ask our tailor to join that topic. We met to talk about your prize, so let's talk about the kind of daggers you want. The blacksmith brought the conversation back to the topic. Dowlun was a lot less enthusiastic all of a sudden. Her eyes trailed off into the distance, looking through him, not at him. I actually don't have much of a preference for daggers. Dowlun started off conflicted but suddenly stopped talking. Her eyes focused back on him. She didn't look as excited as she was before, but she looked moderately happy. Could you make me a rope dart instead? She asked out of nowhere. Seth looked at her perplexed. What was a rope dart? Seth had no problem acknowledging that he didn't know what she was talking about, and the poison fairy quickly explained it. It was a niche weapon from the place she originated from. Roughly explained, it was a spike or a blade at the end of a rope or chain. If it wasn't for magic or in her case spiritual energy, this didn't sound like the most useful weapon for combat, to Seth. However, Dowlun had aptly shown that her fighting style relied a lot on throwing disposable blades or needles at her opponent. Putting a string on that to make them easily retrievable wasn't the craziest idea, since the actually fighting skill already existed. Since the cultivator finally had an idea about what weapon she wanted from Seth, they spent the next hour ironing out what exactly it was supposed to look like. In the end, it was a blade at the end of a serrated chain, that could also be used as a short dagger. Concerning the powers it should possess, Dowlun was less vocal. She simply didn't know what was possible and how much the blacksmith was capable of. The only specification she was able to come up with was that it had to resist corrosion from her poison energy. Do you already have a way to control the dart? Seth asked to clarify. Cultivators had their own ways of remote controlling their armament, as many of the sword cultivators had proven in previous battles. Dowlun nodded. I possess a heaven-grade manual for fighting with a rope dart, but it's a very rare weapon, which is why I never used it until now, and why she almost forgot that she had it. This manual seemed to be the reason that she had some excitement for her prize. Seth was okay with that, at least she didn't just say some kind of dagger. A rope dart was something quite exotic and fresh, which was why he was also motivated to make it. All right then. You will return with us to Delta and stay at the embassy until your prize is ready. There we can also talk about your robes. Chapter 1154 Putrid Edge. After the tournament, there was a lot of stuff for Minas Mar to do. The Pythian village had suffered a lot of damage. Although it was not as great of a concern to Minas Mar, as the place was not meant to be permanent in the first place, they had to prepare emergency shelters. There were still many guests without the permission to enter Little Gamma, who wished to stay and watch the award ceremony. The most important part of said ceremony was Seth's sole responsibility, apart from appearing at one or two press conferences. As such, while everyone else was busy with the aftermath, the blacksmith sat in his workshop in Minas Mar and pondered over the window of blueprint. Seth had never really heard of a rope dart, and he also didn't inherit any blueprints he could base it off of. After Dowlun had described the weapon and its use to him, he realized that he had some dim memories of seeing a similar weapon in a video game or two he used to play for a short while. Based on her description and vague memories of the game, he tried to come up with a design using blueprint to simulate various materials. For this, Seth had a pile of unexpected spoils from the fights in the Pythian village beside him. He wasn't out there himself, so he didn't get any souls, but Finn, Bulko, and Lixus brought back a bunch of pre-processed parts from the monster puppets they destroyed. Of course, it wasn't the dart part he was struggling with. According to the poison fairy, the dart of a rope dart could be blunt like the weight of a chain sickle, or essentially be a heavy dagger tied to the end of the rope. Seth had already secured the material for the dart, a piece of legendary bones of Seth. For Ortega's armor, a slaughterer's set made of bones of Seth, he had made a whole batch from the meteoric iron Xiongpeng, the sect master of the Soaring Eagle sect gave him. As the basic effects of the metal were random, the blacksmith had processed a bunch of the material, making several bars to get the right raw material for the armor. Despite his heightened luck, he was also left with a small stack of pieces that ended up unusable, as their powers didn't fit the set, or the chosen of Montu. With Seth's blessing as the god of desert, chaos, and destruction, it was not too weird to have some pieces that aligned with Daolun's needs. One of the bracers, for example, had an effect called Desert Viper's Corrosion, however, it was applied to the wearer and caused constant corrosion damage when wearing. He couldn't just reforge it to get this effect again, but it proved there was a chance to get something that went along with her skills. Worst case, he would make one with adamantium and stack it with enchantments. The material of the dart was not his worry, what he was pondering over was the rope. Daolun mentioned that it did not have to be a rope, but that there were also versions with chains. As a blacksmith, making a chain was not hard, but Seth wasn't ready to take the easy way out. Seth had quite a few options. The material scavenged from the puppets had a bunch of relic-rated refined sinews, which would make for great bowstrings, but he would have to reprocess them to make them into rope. Another option was asking Nico to create magic threads into a rope. The same could be done with Puffle's threads. A completely different idea was the vines of the guardian tree, who were inherently flexible, but all the options meant straying away from his expertise. This was the public award for the great tournament. He needed something that screamed blacksmith. Even further, something unique to him and his skill set. As he sat there, pondering, he finally had an enlightenment. When Daolun mentioned that the rope dart could also use a chain, the picture he had in his head was a chain of heavy links. The traditional picture of a chain. A chain and blacksmith would forge. But he wasn't just a blacksmith. Seth was a master goldsmith, and a goldsmith had many ways to create a chain, and suddenly the easy way out became the first choice, as he found a way to give it his own spin. After perusing his jewelry blueprints, Seth quickly found the chain design he wanted to use. The Byzantial chain, also called the Idiot's Delight, was an intricate 4-in-1 chain design, meaning that each link passed through 4 others. The overall look not just resembled a rope, but also allowed the chain to have some flex and drape like a real rope. However, the intricate 3-dimensional design also meant an increase in weight, limiting his choice of materials to something more on the light. Thinking of light and durable materials, Seth suddenly smirked. The best trade-off between weight and durability was Ithildan, the refined form of Mithril. The obvious choice was the dwarven Ithildan originating from Poulter's home world. However, the blacksmith could not help but entertain this small intrusive thought. What if he used Erdhan Ithildan on the chain? Wouldn't that be fun? He really started liking the idea of a rope dart, after being hit with a stroke of inspiration, and got right to work. The pale blue flames blazed as Seth started off with the chain. The first step was turning a few bars of Ithildan into billets, which he could later use to make wire for the chain. As the hammer fell, his voice rose, expelling dissonant words. Fueled by his ability, the flames rose on the anvil, while a sickly fog gathered on the floor. When choosing the forging ballad, Seth had perused many demons of poison, but ultimately returned to Botus, because he was already familiar with the snake demon. Last time, he had called upon the demon when making the venom Kapesh, because he was not just a demon associated with poison, but also a powerful swordsman. This time's ballad, however, leaned more into calling upon his power as a demonic viper. The description mentioned the weapon in question being imbued with a strong poison effect, but also an increase in reflexes, like those of a snake. As this was a weapon for a poison user, it seemed right to strike the balance here. After preparing the billets, Seth changed gears and began working on the dart part without stopping the ballad. Channeling the Viper demon, he could feel its interest rising, when it saw the bones of Seth, as the god's powers aligned with the mainstream nature of demons. The blacksmith had all the failed parts of Ortega's slaughterers set ready to recycle, in an attempt to get a dart blade that would fit Daolun. Relying on his upgraded lucky trinket, he began forging blades. Ready to make up to 10 versions of the blade, Seth's heart jumped in relief, when the third attempt finished with an effect called Putrid Edge, which had a 20% to cause blood poisoning on target and increased the damage of poisons by 10%. The important part of the description was the effects of the blood poisoning. On the surface, the Putrid Edge didn't sound like much, however, blood poisoning didn't just deal damage based on magic damage, it also lowered all stats by 20% and the resistance to poison and disease by 50% in addition to status ailments that came along with sepsis. The chance was only 1/5, but if it triggered, it would mean an almost certain demise. Especially against someone like Daolun. With the blade finished, he turned to make the chain at the jeweler's table. Although Seth had no interest in asking the tailor for help, he gladly had Sivri help him make the wire and rings for the chain. He wanted a tight weave, so the wire couldn't be too thin and the rings not too big. Weaving the chain was tedious work, but had a meditative effect on Seth, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The incident during the Pythian Games made him question whether they still underestimated their enemies. The length of the rope was based on the user's wingspan and height of the user. Daolun was not overly wide or tall, the blacksmith needed to make just about 3 meters of chain. Of course, he had entertained the thought of somehow making the whole rope able to shoot forth and retract, but he decided that was the job of Daolun's arts, not his. After he finished the chain and attached it to the blade, there were only 2 steps left to finish the blade. Engraving enchantments, and despite knowing it would leave Minasmar with Daolun eventually, he intended to add a soul to it. The blacksmith didn't intend to pull his punches on the prize. Chapter 1155 Viper Dart Award Ceremony. A few hours earlier. "I have just the right thing you need," she exclaimed, before vanishing to the back of the shop. Tanomol had still not returned from THRES yet. In actuality, there had been no more contact from Adam for the past weeks. Another point they had not yet the time to worry about, just like the situation in former Gamma. Luckily, Sandra Irving, Tanomol's associate in Earth, was still here to run the shop and manage the merchandise. The reason Seth was here was to get a soul for the rope dart. After the blacksmith described the weapon and the power he was looking for, he vanished in the back of the temporary shop in the embassy. He could hear her rummage through crates in the back, although she had done a lot to recreate the original aesthetic of Tanomol's Soul Emporium in the rooms given to them. The back was still filled with crates and boxes, as if they just moved in. At least it seemed like she knew her way around, as it didn't take long for Sandra to return with an orb in her hand. It was the device and vessel that allowed even normal people to see the souls stored inside. "This is the soul of the illustrious Circle Serpent, a rare snake that has no poison fangs, but attacks with its tail to inject a deadly poison," she explained proudly, as Seth looked at the soul with his eyes of the maestro. "Soul of a circle snake, rare, big, crafting material. The soul of a rare circle snake, a monster that generates a deadly poison in its tail and uses high acrobatics to travel and attack. High affinity with poison. Skills, Poison Dive, Wheel of Death. Trait, Body Control. A snake with acrobatics," the blacksmith exclaimed, surprised. Apart from that, it was one of the rare souls with a trait and definite skills. From his experience, Seth had realized that this often didn't depend on the quality of the souls, but how defining these traits and skills were for the existence when it was alive. At least when it came to these naturally harvested ones. "It's said that it will bite its own tail and bounce like a wheel to pursue a prey or escape from a predator," Sandra explained readily. Since Seth saved them from the minions of Bragmomal, she had been a lot friendlier with him. "Okay, this will do," the blacksmith decided. Just because he didn't want to leave out a soul, didn't mean that he would go out of his way to find an overwhelming one for Daolun. After all, this weapon would leave Minasmar when the Poison Fairy's contract ran out. Present. Using the soul of the circle snake, Seth forged a soul armament replica of the finished rope dart body. The blacksmith didn't have any enchantments that strengthened poison damage itself. The poison enchantments he did have would make much difference in the hands of Daolun. Instead, Seth decided to stack enchantments for physical attributes on the souls and the body, which would add up to over 100 points to strength, endurance, and agility. The last step was to inject the soul into the weapon and rebirth it with a bath in the waters of Styx. Although the chain made the last step a little difficult, it was far from the difficulty of injecting a soul into the fabric. Soon the rope dart started floating in the bubble of water and a row of notifications rang in his ear. Ding! Effects of the item have changed due to a synergy between powers. Ding! Effects of the item have changed due to the influence of demonic beings. Ding! You have created a legendary item. Plus 100 peepo. Seth had expected the synergy of powers, but the influence of a demonic being? Was it Botus? The blacksmith had not paid the demon off beforehand, so Daolun would have had to pay the price. He cradled his still bare chin, missing the feeling of his beard, as he checked on the item. Viper Dart. Legendary. Physical. Damage, 2300. Mag. Damage 1700. Durability, 5000, Blade. Durability, 2400, Rope. 1 plus 20% to all stats in the Moonlight. 2 plus 60% power of spells and energy-based skills. 3 Encroachment of Botus. 4 Putrid Edge. 5 plus 125 Strength. 6 plus 125 Endurance. 7 plus 125 Agility. 8 Active Skill, Poison Dive of Botus. 9 Active Skill, Wheel of Death. 10 Botus Serpent Rope. An exotic soft weapon, created by the hands of Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith, Master Enchanter, and Master Goldsmith on Earth. The intricate power granted to the item through various means makes mastering the art of wielding it worth the effort. Advised usage requirements, 300 willpower. Seth's eyes rose when he read through the description and realized the changes it went through. This was more than just an enchantment through a forging ballad, it was almost like Botus had slightly blessed the item himself. What was the first and biggest surprise was that Encroachment of Lunacy had changed. Similar to when he used the Feasting Ballad to strengthen it and create Mad Ithildan, Botus's influence changed it and its effects. Encroachment of Botus. Plus 70% poison damage. Poison damage increases with the number of poisoned targets. Improves the power of the wearer based on the indifference or coldness in their actions. Lessens emotions in their action based on willpower. The effect had not just absorbed the poison affinity of the Circle Serpent, but it had completely changed the basis of the lunacy effect. To slowly lose your emotions in battle. This was more terrifying to Seth than becoming a hard-headed mule. He could only hope Daolun had a strong willpower. Apart from this, there were 2 more things affected by the influence of Botus. The smaller change was the snake's original skill, the Poison Dive. Here the effect was strengthened and the poison was switched. Poison Dive of Botus, cooldown, 15 minutes. Poison duration 1 minute. The dart launches forward with double the user's attack speed, like the head of a viper, resembling the swift sword of Botus. Targets are afflicted by the deadly poison of Botus on hit. The bigger change was the new effect, which had seemingly absorbed the trait, body control that was supposed to be granted to the carrier. Passive skill. The viper dart bears the temperament of Botus. In case of the target dodging, or the user lacking in skill, the dart will correct its course to a certain extent to aim for the opponent's vitals. Similar to the original malicious will of Seth's bow, the Viper Dart had a minor targeting option overall. It was ambitious whether the influence of Botus was something good, but Seth thought that it definitely was an overall improvement. Maybe not losing the trait for the targeting, but Daolun would never know about it, anyway. Lastly, the Wheel of Death was a weird charge skill, that was about cartwheeling with an aura of poison, away from the opponent in the best case. Now that the rope dart was finished, they could finally, officially, bring the Pythian Games to a grandiose close. The award ceremony was the final stone to end the Pythian Games, broadcast to almost all corners of the system worlds. In front of the world, Seth handed over the Viper Dart to Daolun, for everyone to see. The final proof to the world, that Seth was able to create legendary custom equipment. Or did it? People couldn't just use appraisal through the screens, which was why they even had 3 independent appraisers certify the weapon to the audience. After reaching a certain level, professional appraisers gained the power to display the effects of the items they appraised. Displaying the stats on screen could be forged, but the status windows they display couldn't be faked. Of course, they hid all the info apart from the legendary rating and the flavor text. This was Daolun's private information, after all. But to eradicate even the last doubts, Daolun had agreed to show some moves. Of course, the Poison Fairy was the first to see her new weapon, to make sure she was satisfied. One didn't need an appraisal skill, to see the air about her change the moment she grasped her new weapon. She stood at the center of the arena and started going through a move set, getting used to her new weapon. The bright silver chain with the dark grey blade at the end started moving faster and faster as the Poison Fairy moved into the arena. Slowly, poison aura started building up around her and enveloped the weapon, and it became obvious that she started precisely controlling its movements. The poisonous winds created as a side effect of her show carved trenches into the mithril flooring of the arena, shocking the audience. Ding! Your reputation in other worlds has increased tremendously. Plus 125,000 P power of existence. Seth heard the notification after the performance ended. But the immediate amount of points pouring in and the prospect of increased yields in the future, currently couldn't distract him from the pain he felt when Daolun fucked up the whole arena floor. Did she have any idea how long the apprentices had to polish those? With some laughs and some tears, the Pythian Games had finally come to an end 3 days after the final of the grand tournament. The tourists would leave in a few days, Minas Mar would clean up the Pythian village and maybe things would finally calm down a little. Chapter 1156 Somewhere Else, 31. Far north of Delta. The heavy steel door slammed open, letting a ravaging icy wind blow snow inside the concrete corridor. A massive man bent down to step through the door and escape the blizzard outside. His heavy boots made loud noises as he stepped on the steel grate floor, announcing his return. He stomped down the corridor and entered a small room to the left, where he took off the heavy coat, fashioned from the rough hide of a monster with dense black fur. Putting away the coat revealed a man who looked like a human but with unnatural proportions. His upper body was unnaturally thick and wide, like a wine barrel. Sitting on his wide shoulders, his head looked like a pinhead. While his upper body was very wide, it slimmed down to an incredibly small waist, when compared to the barrel-like chest. His legs were comparatively small, but very muscular, stretching the crude trousers he wore. He looked like a normal human, with cartoonishly over-exaggerated proportions. After putting away the coat he walked down the corridor and past another steel door. Warm air welcomed him, as he entered the central room. Concrete floor, concrete walls, concrete ceiling, but someone had filled the room with run-down carpets and furniture to make it a home. "You are back," he was greeted by a high voice. Sitting on the bleached red sofa was a woman just like him. She too had cartoonishly distorted proportions. The woman that called out to him looked way too slim, without being anorexic, while her hips were the only thing that looked normal, so they were way too big for her. "Yeah, the blizzard got stronger. I just barely found the way back. I can't wait to get out of this place," the huge man complained a little as he passed by her, walking into a sad excuse of a kitchen. "Did you find something?" she asked surprised. "Yeah, I found some cans that are still good and managed to catch a pigeon monster that wasn't infected," he called out from the kitchen. After storing away his finds, he came back out and plopped down on the sofa beside her. "Is Cromwell still watching the security footage?" he asked, sitting beside her. The salvaged TV in front of them was displaying the movie from some of the discs they found in Omega. After escaping from Gamma they had wandered around the mountains for some time until Cromwell found them. Although they still looked weird, even in human form, the scientist had managed to stabilize their condition to the point that they could try to return to human civilization. Yet, they were stuck up here on the edges of the northern mountains. Instead of returning to Delta, the scientist had brought them to the edges of Omega, the origin of the virus that was the foundation of the serum that kind of saved and ruined their lives at the same time. Cromwell told them that he had noticed a change in the infected, possibly a mutation of the virus, and he needed to observe it. As they were technically immortal and could be further infected, they didn't refuse the responsibility to help him as some of the few people unaffected by the disease. They had connected the technology in this old bunker with many of the security systems remaining in Omega, to allow Cromwell to monitor part of the city close to here. "Did you see the Black Knight again?" she asked, causing his hair to stand on end just at the thought of that creature. They had made several trips to Omega, to get food and furniture, and scavenge the city to make their base more habitable. The city was filled with mindless undead but not necessarily dangerous. Most zombies were motionless, like meat statues, as long as nothing uninfected caught their attention. Not even the infected beast from the portals acted unless there was someone uninfected. As people who took the immortal serum, or a variant of it, they had nothing to fear from those inert ones. However, there was also the change Cromwell spoke of. They were mutants among the infected. Maybe 1 in 10,000 zombies would suddenly start cannibalizing on the normal ones. The disturbing thing was that their victim would actually cease to exist. Similar to how they were able to gain strength by killing other creatures and absorbing their souls, these zombies did the same to their compatriots. In the process, they were not just gaining strength but showed signs of regaining a basic intellect. At least, according to Cromwell. These mutants were the scary ones they had to be careful of, especially the monster mutants. However, above them all was the Black Knight, a creature wearing a pitch-black armor, shining like obsidian and exuding a black fog wherever he went. They had only ever seen him from a distance and never dared to approach or observe for long unless through the cameras. The Black Knight exuded an aura that struck instinctual fear into them, and not just them. Even the mindless shufflers would back away from him. Truly terrifying was the footage of times when the mutants dared to attack the knight. They were helpless. Whether it was strength or intelligence, they were far below the knight. Not even the monstrous. But what really disturbed them, was what the knight actually did to them. The difference in power was like a 3-year-old attacking an adult. In the footage, they had the knight simply grasped the mutant by the throat and lifted it in the air. He would just stand there and watch the creature helplessly struggle in his hands, as the black fog that rose from his body, started eating away at their flesh, like a supernatural acid. They would have believed it, if they didn't have the recording, but before their very eyes, the technically immortal undead simply turned into a puddle of black sludge over the course of a minute. This was what they felt deep down, whenever they saw the being. The Black Knight was literal death. Uncaring, uncompromising, unstoppable, not even immortals were able to escape the fate he allotted. After discovering him, he was added to the subject Cromwell surveilled, but the two of them did their best to avoid it. Luckily, I didn't see it today. I would have shit my pants if I met it in this blizzard, he said, shuddering at the thought. Oh my, then I have some good and some bad news for you, Cromwell said, as he entered the living room. An amused smile played around his lips. Had he listened to their conversation? We will be leaving for Delta very soon, he announced. Nice, the hunk exclaimed. However, the woman looked at him questioning. Why the sudden change? Are you done with your observations? Wouldn't you start experimenting now, or something like that? She asked, suspicious of the sudden change. They had talked quite often, about wanting to return, but he had always denied the request, bringing up the importance of this research. If it was my decision, we wouldn't leave, but it seems there is a situation, he said, and moments later, there was a heavy knocking that could be heard in the corridor outside. Someone was knocking on the door of their bunker? Cromwell didn't say any more and leisurely opened the inner door, passing through the corridor, to open the outer door. Curious and careful, the other two follow, reading their weapons. The bloke held a rapier and dagger, while the woman weighed a meaty mace with thorns in her hand. This brings me to the bad news for you, Greed Hoskin. Cromwell opened the door, and outside, in the raging blizzard, stood the Black Knight exuding black mist, his fist still raised to knock again. The bloke was barely able to clench his cheeks, to hinder his bowels from evacuating explosively. Cromwell, follow me. We need to return. Chapter 1157 Schemes in Delta. Delta, 2 days after the final. His heart pounded like crazy, but he knew of the importance of his mission. This was their only chance to secure the document, as everything was being prepared for the evacuation from Delta. Crouched, he silently snuck along the corridors of Krina's embassy. Tonight was the only chance when all documents were stored together for moving them, before they were transported tomorrow. The commander had especially given him the Ring of Greater Shadows and a high-grade invisibility cloak for the mission. Despite that, it was no easy task to sneak into the embassy. Even in the middle of the night, there was a great number of guards and security systems. The safety measures even mixed Erdhan technology with Krina's magic formations. It was next to impossible to move around the main complex of the embassy with his skills. Luckily, the documents they were after were not actually deemed highly important. He wasn't here to steal state secrets or proof of Merkrautsar's corruption. What he needed was located in the storage rooms on the subterranean levels, where the ordinary documents and magical contracts were gathered and stored for movement tomorrow. Down here, the security was much laxer. The Erdhan cameras were easily evaded with the invisibility cloak, and with his thief skills and the relic-rated ring from the commander, the guards were also no problem. Following his mini-map of the complex, he found an easy way down, using the original emergency staircase, leading him to the storage parcels. While the stairs were only surveilled by cameras and guards, his trap detection told him that he had to be more careful in this corridor lined by chain-link cages. Blowing a handful of powered magic crystals into the air, made the various formations in the path visible. After analyzing and identifying the various magic traps and alarm magic installed, he proceeded to use the low-rank magic scroll water vapor to create a thin mist in the corridor. In addition to the formations on the floor, he found that the path was also secured by laser barriers. They were cleverly placed in a way that someone who tried evading the formations was forced to trip the alarm with the laser sensors, and if one tried to evade the barriers, they had to trip the trap formations. A simple yet effective setup that was able to thwart most simple thieves. But that was all. A shadow thief like him, equipped with the relic-rated ring, could easily evade this. The safety measures fit the perceived value of what was stored here. As a matter of fact, most of the stuff down here had no value and was not worth stealing. The thief melted into the shadows with the help of the Greater Ring of Shadows and was able to pass by most formations and technology by simply moving along the ceiling. He was long since accustomed to the navigation along the ceiling and quickly found the parcel he was looking for. It was filled with stacks of boxes of magic documents. Boring stuff that mostly documented administrative processes in Delta. Really nothing one was supposed to steal, but here was the key to their plan. He rummaged through the boxes, comparing their dates and contents until he found what he was looking for. So what if Krina wanted to leave Delta? So what if many of the traitors left with the cowards? They would stay and they would defend Delta from outsiders. As long as they had these, they would be able to break loose from Krina. Of course, he couldn't just steal the boxes he needed. That would have been noticed tomorrow during the transportation, however. Opening the boxes, he emptied their contents into his inventory and filled the boxes with stacks of blank paper. Like this, they would only notice what was gone when it was already too late, if they ever found out what was missing in the first place. He kind of doubted anyone would have checked the contents of these boxes in the next decade. With the key to their rebellion in his pocket, the thief quickly left the underground of the embassy. His steps hesitated as he passed through the dark streets of Delta. The past weeks had left their marks on the city. The peddler of ruin had honored his name. To make their investments in Delta worth it, he had implemented various cost-saving measures. One of which was that street lighting was turned off in most of the city. He didn't quite know, but he heard that they were using the electricity produced in Delta to create magic crystals for the Empire now. They were really just sucking them dry as best as they could before running away. He clicked his tongue in frustration. Despite working his way up, he had no influence on the politics. He was only able to watch on from the sidelines as the mismanaged the city and sucked it dry of resources. Maybe the most disgusted he was by the council, set up by Murkraut Tsar. A bunch of short-sighted old fogies, a bunch of weather vanes, happily nodding and agreeing to whatever the foreigners told them. Yes, Mr. Krina. Please, Mr. Krina. Mr. Spacia will come to take over? Of course, we will accept it, Mr. Krina. His fist involuntarily clenched at the thought of their groveling before a foreign power. Especially that obnoxious little fatty Longbottom. If Murkraut Tsar didn't wear shoes, Ichabod would have probably licked his feet. He would have never thought that he could feel like this towards another human being. He also never expected that he would even consider doing what he was about to do. However, his feet carried him steadily through the dark streets of the city. Passing empty houses and dilapidated shops, he slowly entered a slightly more prosperous area. Stepping out of an alley, he entered a wide main street. Here there were still some shops and bars that managed to stay open because of the regular influx of people. If he walked down to the left, he would get to the System Church's branch in Delta. As for the other direction, it was where his destination lay. Instinctively evading the passerbys, he still mulled over his decision. He was convinced that what he intended to do was right, but he didn't know whether they would believe him. If things failed because of his behavior in the past, he might regret it for the rest of his life. He couldn't remember when, but he had already come to a halt when he realized that he arrived. Looking up, his eyes wandered across the awe-inspiring facade of Minas Mar's embassy. Right, he had arrived. Shaking off his worries and intrusive thoughts, he stepped towards the entrance door, guarded by 2 knights even in the middle of the night. Whether things worked out or not, to see whether the cat was still alive or already dead. It was time to look in the box. In a luxurious salon, hung with heavy smoke clouds from cigarettes and cigars. Men and women in eccentric, expensive clothes stood or sat around a polished wooden table. We should prepare to move, a man with his face hidden in a pale blue wizard robe suggested, bending over the table, toward the person in the center of the room. Wearing a silver suit, she had a heavy aura, as the cigar in her mouth quickly burned away under her strong drags. You are right. It's time to stand by our oath, she agreed ominously. Chapter 1158 An example. We've been had, Finn mumbled disappointed. The lords of Minas Mar, the team captains, and co were assembled in the meeting room at the top of the ancient magic tower. Lena had called in an emergency meeting. The peddler of ruin had finally revealed why he earned that nickname. A god had been born and a legend had appeared on Earth. With this, Earth's grace period was officially over. Of course, the system already stopped blocking them when the Guardian Tree ascended, but it was not public knowledge. Even other powers were likely only found after the incident with the scene. The demons knew. The remnants of the scene probably knew, too, but they didn't know about the significance of this information. Since the demons were involved with the sect alliance, it was probably them that informed Spacia. Well, it was bound to happen eventually, Seth said with a sigh. especially since they directly threw an immortal at them to force the situation. Just putting Yuma Ma on the screen once, was enough to have the whole world know that legends appeared on Earth. If it wasn't now, there would have been another way they had done it. The subsequent reaction was foreseeable. The danger of legends was like the deterrence of nuclear missiles when in the hands of a country or organization. This was also why there was a tacit agreement among the superpowers possessing legends, that they couldn't just be sent to new worlds. This was the point of the whole show they orchestrated this time. It wasn't possible to send legends for no reason, but what if there was an excuse? The excuse was that legendary beings had appeared in a new world and threatened the lives of the natives, for example. Spacia had sent out an official announcement stating exactly that. They intended to claim Earth as a province of the Spacian Empire and send legends for the protection of the citizens. Everyone in the room knew that they were coming to invade them, but on the great stage of the Pathworks, this was a universally accepted reason. It was even seen as a humanitarian mission by some of the powers. Universally accepted, unless of course other powers already had a claim to the world. Powers like Krina, or the Muir Empire. In the case of superpowers clashing and one of them voicing their intention to send legends, there were only two ways it could end. After much diplomacy between the powers involved and others who were part of the treaty, either the other powers would pull out, or there would be a sanctioned battle of legends. And this was the part where all of them finally realized the extent of planning that went into this turn of events. When they read the statement released by Murkraut Tsar, the representative of Krina, everything made sense. The tremendous loss incurred through the destruction of the subterranean granaries due to local mismanagement. The public opinion turned against Krina and their supported merchant guilds. The situation in Earth becoming more and more dangerous, as shown in the appearance of legends and the fall of the allied colony of Arjit Noer. Spacia stated their intention to fight for Earth using legends. All of these pieces became reasons for the ultimate decision: Krina would leave Earth. They would pull out all of their powers and support invested. They would take along whoever Orihuma had joined the troops of Krina and wished to come along. Of course, it was all worded very diplomatically. A hard but sensible choice. Passing the torch of protecting the people to Spacia in an almost amicable way. However, what it meant was that the Empire would evacuate the world as quickly as possible with as much as they were able to carry. Delta would be left without defense. Although they couldn't take the walls they built, they intended to take along the players and their families that had joined the army, since one of the most precious resources of a new system world was actually the Orihuma with their growth potential and bonus stats. The influx of wares from the Krina Empire would also mostly run dry. Although the Empire couldn't stop traders from acting on Earth, merchants were not stupid. With Spacia intending to take over, many would decide not to get involved at all. What about the system church? The bank, the auction house? Monique asked concerned. The system bank, the auction house, and even the Adventurer Guild were organizations that existed almost everywhere in the Pathworks. Would they be affected by the change? Well, nothing will happen immediately. Even when the Empire leaves, the church exists independently. The Krina branch of the system church will only leave when Spacia actually takes over control and their church sends its own members. It will probably be similar for the auction house and the bank. Before you ask, the Adventurer Guild only follows the Dungeon God and exists independently from nations. Unless Spacia intends to anger the Dungeon God, they won't touch the Adventurer Guild. Lena answered her question in detail. Seth was not too bothered by the fact that they had duped them to reveal the existence of legends on Earth, but his lips had been locked in a frown, ever since they realized how much had gone into this plan, all to technically offer them to Spacia on a silver platter. What had him reeling even more was the name he read at the bottom of the original statement from Spacia. The Durnham royal family. Nadina, the chosen necromancer they had faced during the evaluation and who managed to get her hands on a bona fide ancient skeleton dragon. Just how many of the things that had happened on Earth ever since the evaluation was she involved in? Who knew for how long Spacia was already involved with the scene? How many of their deeds and actions were actually motivated by Spacia, by Nadina from the back? Had Spacia made the scene attack Minas Mar to wipe one of them out, to weaken them for this very moment? They had expected there to be some overarching plan to the whole story, but for it to be this big? To think that even Krina worked with Spacia to create the current situation. But I didn't ask everyone to come here to inform you about current changes. Others have made their decisions, now we have to make ours. What role do we want to play in this future? Lena asked in the room, but her eyes were on Seth, who sat at the top of the table, opposite her. In the very beginning, Seth ran. He ran and improved until his power grew. He assembled people around himself he could trust and stumbled upon a cozy home upon which he tried to build a calm life for himself and the people he liked, in this chaotic world. Although he often found himself bothered by the things happening in the world, he was okay as long as his own world stayed intact. Myanmar became his world, and with more people joining, the world expanded. In the beginning, he found compromises to problems that not necessarily bothered him, but the people he cared for. Myanmar even became its own district, and Seth arranged himself with it, that the people living under their care, were also part of his people. Originally, this was all he wanted. A peaceful world, where he and his precious ones and friends could be happy and do what made them happy. But he had realized some time ago, that staying passive when the rest of the world was an aggressive pack of assholes and only defending or evading, was not the solution to their problems. He had made the decision some time ago, so it was easy to follow through with it now. It's time to make an example out of somebody. Well said, Seth, a familiar voice they had not heard in a very long time suddenly answered him. Standing in the door frame was the figure of a scantily clad woman. The queen of making an example out of somebody. The spiciest sorceress in existence. Alzalsar. Chapter 1159 Yellow Jack. Delta. Quick steps echoed in the decaying streets of the demon district. However, the excitement of the hunt only soothed his boredom slightly. His sharp eyes watched the little mantis demon sprint through the alleys, knocking and trying to open random doors. All of these houses were long abandoned. WebNovel's subordinates had no interest in living in the decaying structure the humans left to the demons. The demons that used to live here, those who didn't evacuate in time, ended up like the little mantis, as his playthings. Soggy plaster and bricks crumbled under his claws as he stalked his prey, sneaking along the walls high above. This was all he could do to pass the time, as they waited for the Greta harvest. At least it would happen soon. The thought of humans living so close by and not being able to hunt them irked him. Melancholic, he realized that the chase was over. The mantis had taken several more turns but finally had to stop from exhaustion. Breathing heavily, she whimpered in despair, as she slowly slid down the filthy wall behind her. Quietly, he walked until he was right above it. His wings buzzed, alerting her of his presence. Her faceted eyes frozen in shock, she looked up at the wall she was leaning on. The small demon screamed in panic. Kaie! Hell ugh! The mantis couldn't even finish a word before he was upon it. His mandibles crushed the crunchy shell. Delectable juices gushed into his throat and ran down his chin. A single bite to the neck and his prey was limply hanging from his mouth, dead. By WebNovel, Yellow Jack. Another one, he was greeted as he came back to camp. He was still holding half the body of his prey in his hands, busy ripping chunks of flesh and innards from his snack. He looked up, still chewing parts of mantis. What else is there to do? We can't train, we can't go out and fight, we can't go out and hunt. All I can do is capture these maggots that don't deserve to be called demons. The winged hunter shrugged his two sets of shoulders. Well, let's hope you didn't spoil your appetite with that. A messenger from Durham has reached the commander. Krana will pull out their troops today in the evening. They will only leave a minimum number. Commander said we will strike tonight. Officially, the troops of Krana were to wait for Spacia's army to take over Delta in their stead before leaving. That was what Krana knew. Unofficially, Spacia had no intention to bother with the people of Earth. The little witch of Durham made a deal with them, they didn't want to refuse. Delta was theirs. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet of human souls. His wings buzzed in excitement. He didn't care much for the plan. Salvia was dripping from his mandible at the thought of soft, human flesh. Disgusted, he threw away the half-eaten corpse in his hand. How could he keep eating this shit with the prospect of a much better future prey? Of course not, I'm ready whenever, he exclaimed. His stomach unspoiled? He had barely eaten anything. He was so ready to fill it with gourmet food. The hardest was waiting for the night. When the sun slowly started sinking, their commander finally called for their assembly. The demon army gathered close to the new summoning circle at the center of the demon district. They had cleared several blocks of building, to create a massive formation, powered by the fiery power of the mountain beneath their feet. This magic circle also had an additional effect, to weaken and ultimately break the magic Krana used to calm the volcano. Did Spacia really think they could use them so easily? Once they had their fill, they would leave and blow up all of Delta, right in the face of the Empire. I won't give you a long speech. Krana is gone. You all know why we are here. Go ahead, rampage, murder, plunder, Do whatever you want, but don't forget, 40% of anything you bring back, belongs to His Highness. Anybody who tries to hide their loot is punishable by corporal punishment. One last thing, stay away from the embassy of Minas March. No need to stir up a hornet's nest. With few words, the commander, a massive demon in both height and width, sent them off to attack the city. Bragmummel's demons didn't move in orderly rows, but more like a swarm of locusts, some even resembled locusts. Spreading his wings, he rose up to join his brothers in the sky. Finally, he was able to stretch his wings. The cloud of monsters rose above the demon district and dove toward the part of Delta, populated by humans. Despite many people emigrating to Minas Mar, there were still millions in Delta. More than enough for them to feast. The moment he was above the human part of Delta, he couldn't hold himself back any longer. Diving down in a straight line, Yellow Jack punched his forearms into the wall of the tower-like building. He didn't stop, instead his claws ripped a hole into the building, from the point of entry, all the way to the ground, where he landed. He laughed like a maniac the whole time, his euphoria fueled by the surprised faces of residents who had no idea what was going on. It was as the leaders said. The little piggies had relied on barriers and magic to protect their tender meat, this was now over. No grenade, no shell. The people inside surprisingly didn't just run and scream. Despite the initial shock, they had instantly equipped armor and weapons. The tips of spears poked for his body, but they simply glanced at his chitin skin. The insect demon laughed in a deep, malicious voice. I love it when the prey is fighting back. The fear in their eyes when they finally lose all hope is just. Thunk. Yellow Jack suddenly felt an impact on the back of his head, interrupting his monologue. He wanted to turn around and see who dared to attack him from behind when his attention was caught by a peculiar thing. His many eyes showed him various images of the tip of an arrow. The weird part was that he saw it from the back, as if. Only then did his brain finally realize that his monologue was not interrupted. It was ended for good. Losing his senses, he slumped to the ground. As he fell, he revealed the picture of a knight in bright silver armor to the family that had desperately defended themselves against the wasp demon. He slowly lowered the empty bow he held in hand. The knight nodded at them before he continued moving. Hoo-hoo! Moments later, Delta was shaken by the sound of warning sirens. The ear-shattering sound was not stopped by walls or isolation and went on for a full minute before fell silent. The sound of heavy boots marching through the streets grew louder. Had the forces of Krna not left? Had they returned? The distressed people dared to foster an glimmer of hope. But no, what followed next told them otherwise. Hear yet, citizens of Delta. This is the Tower Master of Minas Mar speaking to you with an important announcement. We decided to take over. Delta is now a special administrative region of Minas Mar, effective immediately. As for you, goddamn demon scum, get the fuck off of my property. Thunder and explosions roared in the city. His words were like a signal that announced the start of a war. The night was filled with the noise of battle, as the two invading forces clashed for sovereignty over Delta. Chapter 1160 This arrogant little. Ichabod Longbottom cursed at the announcement that just echoed across the city. He knew it. He knew Minas Mar were just a bunch of power-hungry tyrants. He never liked their conceited leader. Quick, activate ego. Strike both parties down, he declared. Under the influence of Krna's new representative, he had managed to claw his way back into a position of power. Now he was part of the council in charge of governing Delta. Ego is for defense against external enemies. They are already within the city parameters, another member said, obviously tired of Ichabod's stupid ideas and antics. Project Ego was a defense system based on the floating peaks surrounding Delta. It had no inward-facing attack or defense qualities. And anyway, all we can do now is hope Minas Mar wins. At least they wouldn't kill us, another member commented. What are you even saying? Do you hear yourself talk, man? We are the chosen representatives of the people. We can't give up. We need to defend Delta from these invaders. Ichabod insisted that they had to do something. However, his emotional speech only caused wry and sarcastic smiles. You mean the same way you groveled before Murkrautsar to get a seat in this council? Some asked, his voice oozing with acid. Enough. Ichabod became red as a tomato and was about to scream at the man when the oldest in the council told them to shut up. Ichabod is right in one thing. We can't just wait for someone to win and hand over the city to the victor. We have to mobilize the special forces to interfere, he spoke his mind. In the meantime, we should seek shelter in the complex below the parliament. At least until reinforcement from Spacia arrives, he added. For a moment he seemed like he meant well, but in the end, he was no different from them. Throw out the special forces as a pretense and hide until the storm passes. Seth was a little surprised to find a horde of demons swarming Delta. It seemed like everyone had the same idea about acting a little more aggressively. Since Krna announced their retreat from Delta, only leaving a minimum number of personnel to keep the city safe until Spacia came, it felt like an invitation to take the city. They expected there to be few people, but nobody expected that minimum personnel meant that they even pulled out the security technicians and deactivated building security. This was suspicious, but none of Seth's worries, for now. He glared at the horde of demons who stopped at his announcement but didn't retreat. A massively obese-looking demon slowly floated to the front of the demons in the sky. The beast was easily 5 meters in height and width. We are the army of WebNovel. We don't back down from a fight, he answered smugly, looking down at the army of knights and golems. There were easily thrice as many demons as people on Mars' side. Are you sure you want this? Seth asked with a dangerous edge in his words. They had come to Delta by teleporting to Mars, which was why there were only Oath Guards and golems making up their ground forces. Both groups had grown quite a bit. Because of the expansion of Mars, the Oath Guard now numbered roughly 3,500 men, of which 2,000 were here. Apart from them, there were the over 5,000 golem made of orcs from Kazdams, as well as the various golem knights and Faer. On the surface, the demons really seemed like they had an advantage. However, Mars had arrived prepared for a battle. Haha! WebNovel would skin us alive if he heard we retreated without a fight. Attack, the fat demon commanded, not listening to Seth. His command to attack was overshadowed by an ear-shattering crack in the sky. You asked for it, Seth shrugged, as hell broke loose. Thunder and lightning roared in the clouds above. The strikes of light illuminating the city with every roar also revealed a massive creature weaving in and out of the tumultuous cloud cover. The next moment beam of heat and light descended from the sky, burning holes in the rows of demon. At the same moment, storms of lightning, ice, and fire rained down on them. The demon army fell into chaos, as the herd was suddenly thinned. Up in the clouds, Puffles and Tatzel were farming experience remotely, making sure not to destroy the city below the demons. The sky filled with scenes straight from apocalypse movies, illuminated the city below, where the army of Mars engaged the demons in brutal combat. What looked like an overwhelming victory to the demonic forces, quickly revealed itself as a one-sided massacre as Mars' relic-rated weapons cut through the demons like a hot knife through butter. Golems swarmed the streets on the hunt for demons, while the Oath Guards put priority on evacuating the survivors of Delta under Mars' shield, which covered almost a fifth of the city. The defenses set up by Krna were gone, but this also meant nothing blocked the tower of Mars from showing its power. Look, what are those beasts in the sky? One of the assemblymen who was observing the situation outside exclaimed. At his exclamation, several more men came to take a look, shocked by the sight of the massive silhouettes in the clouds. The shadows of a giant flying centipede and a smaller dragon-like creature reigning above the clouds were eerily familiar. However, it took someone tone-deaf like Ichabod to speak out about what everyone was thinking. It's the pets of the Tower Master. But unlike everyone else who was concerned by the sight and the danger these creatures exuded, the former Chancellor seemed almost excited. The rotund man waddled back to the bench of the council. This is our chance. These creatures have invaded the airspace of Delta. I formally request for the deployment of the ego system. Let's make an example of his pets and shoot them from the sky. Without them, Mars and the demons will whittle each other away. I'm convinced our special forces and our city guards are enough to take care of what is left then, he spoke quickly in a single breath. Although Ichabod spoke like a nutcase, a disconcerting craze in his eyes, the councilmen were pondering. The oldest of them, given the highest rank by Murkraut Tsar, finally nodded after they convened for a moment. Dealing a hit to Mars before they could overrun the city was not the worst idea. Excitedly, Ichabod went along with the preparations to deploy Project Ego. Originally planned as a continuous defense system, at the suggestion of the representative of Krna, they had decided to only activate it in emergencies to save energy. With the magic seals of all 5 councilmen, they activated Project Ego, the defense system using the floating peaks surrounding Delta in the sky. Tensed they waited for the magic of the system to activate and the throes of pain and death of the creatures in the sky. Well, mostly Ichabod waited for it. However, nothing happened. It didn't activate, one of the assemblymen at the window confirmed their suspicion. They tried again. And again. And again, but it didn't work. Did it break? Ichabod asked in dismay. Did the reduced maintenance lead to this? None of them knew that this was their lucky day. Minas Mar had long since used the backdoor originally implemented by Alzalsar to take back control of Project Ego. Who knew what would have happened to them, if they managed to actually harm either Tetzel or Puffles?